Your son is unconscious on the street. A woman calls the mob boss. What he did next changed her life forever. Comment below and tell me what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10, and let me know what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The fine March drizzle cut through the Chicago dawn like icy scalpels, turning the asphalt of Michigan Avenue into a black mirror that reflected the neon lights of bars still resisting the sunrise. Emily Hayes adjusted the strap of her bag on her sore shoulder, feeling the weight of another 12-hour shift at the county hospital on the south side. Her white sneakers, worn out from months of rushing through hospital corridors, made a wet sound with every step she took toward the bus stop. At 21, Emily carried a maturity on her shoulders that life had forced upon her far too early. Her nursing scrubs, washed so many times they had lost their original color, clung to her thin but resilient body. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a practical bun, a few rebellious strands escaping to frame a face where natural beauty constantly fought with exhaustion. Her almond-shaped eyes, a gift from her mother, shone with a determination that not even double shifts could completely extinguish. The two-room apartment in a working-class neighborhood awaited her with her mother, Sarah, who was probably still awake despite the hour. Worried about her daughter's delay, Emily smiled wearily, thinking of the strong woman who had raised her alone, working as a housekeeper until health problems forced her into early retirement. Every penny she earned was counted, every dream weighed on the scale of necessity. The medical degree she aspired to seemed as distant as the stars hidden by the heavy dawn clouds. That's when she saw the small silhouette collapsed in the middle of the sidewalk. Emily stopped abruptly, her heart racing. A boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, lay motionless on the wet ground. His pale skin contrasted with the dark hair stuck to his sweaty forehead, and even from a distance she could see the tremor shaking his small, thin body. Without a second's hesitation, she dropped her bag and ran towards the child, her professional instincts taking over. "Hey, sweetie, can you hear me?" she whispered, kneeling beside the boy and immediately checking his vital signs. His pulse was rapid but present, his breathing shallow but steady. Severe dehydration, possibly hypoglycemia. Hang on, everything's going to be okay. With precise movements, Emily turned the boy onto his side, checking for any airway obstructions, while reaching for her phone in her bag to call 911. It was then that she noticed the expensive phone next to the child, a device that cost more than 3 months of her salary. Before she could fully process this information, the device began to ring insistently. Emily looked at the unconscious boy, then at the ringing phone. Common sense told her not to answer, but something in the desperation of that ring made her hesitate. What if it was someone looking for the child? What if it was someone who could help? With her free hand, she answered the call. "Hello." The voice that answered on the other end of the line made her blood run cold. Deep, controlled, but laden with an authority that seemed capable of moving mountains or destroying them at will. "Who is this? Where is Michael?" Emily swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady as she continued to monitor the boy's vitals. "My name is Emily. I'm a nurse. I found your son." "Michael?" "Unconscious on Michigan Avenue. I've already called an ambulance. He's breathing but needs urgent medical attention." The silence on the other end lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "Michigan Avenue. What's the cross street?" "Near the 2400 block, across from Joe's bar." "Don't move from there. I'm on my way." The call was cut off abruptly, leaving Emily alone with the unconscious boy and a growing premonition that she had just gotten into something much bigger than she imagined. Michael, that was his name. A little boy wearing clothes far too expensive to be alone on a dangerous street at dawn. The ambulance arrived first, 15 minutes after her call. Emily accompanied the paramedics as they stabilized Michael and prepared him for transport. Throughout the process, she stayed close, whispering words of comfort, even though she knew he probably couldn't hear her. There was something about that childish face that touched a sensitive fiber of her heart, a vulnerability that awakened all her maternal instincts. "Are you coming with us?" one of the paramedics asked as they placed the stretcher in the ambulance. Emily hesitated. Technically, it wasn't her responsibility. She had done her duty by calling for help and staying with the child until it arrived. But something stronger than logic pushed her into that ambulance. "Yes, I am." The private hospital where they took Michael was in the Gold Coast, a world completely different from the overcrowded corridors where Emily worked. Here, the floors gleamed, the walls were decorated with expensive paintings, and the service was delivered with an efficiency that money easily bought. She felt out of place amidst that luxury, even more so with her wrinkled scrubs and disheveled hair from the long night. Michael was taken directly to a private emergency room, where a team of doctors began procedures. Emily stood outside, sitting in a soft leather armchair that probably cost more than all the furniture in her house. The fatigue from her shift was beginning to take its toll, but the adrenaline of what had just happened kept her senses sharp. It was then that she felt his presence even before she saw him. Julian Thorne entered the hospital like a contained storm. Tall, dark hair combed back perfectly even at dawn, wearing an Italian suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Two men accompanied him, clearly bodyguards, but it was impossible not to notice that all attention was focused on him. There was something in his presence that made people instinctively bow, a natural authority that needed no announcement. His dark eyes scanned the room until they found Emily. For a moment that seemed eternal. They stared at each other across the hospital lobby. He assessed her from head to toe, noticing the simple uniform, the tired but dignified posture, the determined eyes that did not look away from his despite the obvious intimidation. Emily stood up as he approached, her legs feeling weak but refusing to show it. Up close, Julian was even more imposing. A square jaw, marked by a surgically precise beard, framed lips that seemed accustomed to giving orders no one would dare question, but it was his eyes that completely disarmed her. Black as the night outside, they carried an intensity that seemed capable of seeing through her soul. "You're Emily." It wasn't a question, but a statement made with the deep voice she recognized from the phone. "Yes, sir." "How did you find my son?" Emily took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts before answering. There was something in the way he spoke that demanded precision, total honesty. "I was coming home from work when I saw him collapsed on the sidewalk. He was unconscious, showing signs of severe dehydration and possible hypoglycemia. I administered first aid and called 911. "And why did you answer his phone?" The question came loaded with a suspicion that Emily understood perfectly. In this world of appearances and ulterior motives, her action could seem suspicious, because I thought it might be someone looking for him, someone who could help. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "And because I'm a nurse. It's my instinct to care for those in need." Julian studied her in silence for a few more seconds. He was used to reading people, to detecting lies and hidden intentions with the precision of someone who had survived years in a world where mistrust was a matter of life and death. But in this woman, he saw only raw honesty and a quiet courage that intrigued him more than he would like to admit. "Mr. Thorne," a doctor approached, interrupting the tense moment. "Michael is stable. It was exhaustion and dehydration, but nothing serious. You can see him now." Emily took a step back, preparing to leave, but Julian's voice stopped her. Come with me." It wasn't a request, but she followed him anyway, curious about the boy she had saved and disturbed by the mysterious man who clearly controlled much more than just the situation in that hospital. The private room where Michael was resting was larger than her entire living room. Emily observed the walls, decorated with expensive children's wallpaper, the state-of-the-art medical equipment arranged discreetly so as not to scare a child, and the hospital bed that looked more like a piece of luxury furniture. But none of that mattered when her eyes fell on the pale little boy dozing between embroidered sheets. Michael had his father's dark hair, but something in his delicate features suggested a sensitivity that contrasted with Julian's hardness. Even in his sleep, his little face carried a tension that shouldn't exist in someone so young. His small hands clutched the sheet as if he feared something precious would be taken from him in his sleep. "Does he run away often?" Emily asked in a low voice, approaching the bed with the silent steps she had learned in the hospital corridors. Julian didn't answer immediately. He stood at the foot of the bed, his large, calloused hands clenched into fists inside his trouser pockets. When he spoke, there was a vulnerability in his voice that he clearly struggled to control. Since his mother died, he's been having episodes, nightmares, anxiety attacks, and sometimes, when he can't sleep, he wanders around the house. Julian paused, his jaw tightening. He'd never made it to the street before. Emily's heart ached. She knew the signs of childhood trauma well, having seen similar cases at the hospital where she worked. Children who lost their sense of security and constantly tested the limits of the world around them in a desperate attempt to find something solid to hold on to. How long has he been like this? 3 years. The answer came loaded with a guilt that Julian clearly carried like a weight on his chest. Emily watched him out of the corner of her eye, noticing how his hands trembled imperceptibly, how his breathing had become more controlled, forced. Behind the mask of ruthless authority, there was a desperate father who didn't know how to help his own son. Michael stirred in bed, letting out a low moan. Instinctively, Emily moved closer, gently placing her hand on the boy's forehead. His skin was cooler, the fever breaking thanks to the IV drip. "Hey, Michael," she whispered in the sweet voice she reserved for her youngest patients. "How are you feeling?" His dark little eyes opened slowly, confused at first, then focusing on Emily's face. To her surprise, instead of crying or calling for his father, Michael just studied her with a quiet curiosity that was disturbingly mature for his age. "Are you a princess?" his hoarse little voice asked, making Emily smile. "No, sweetie, I'm a nurse. My name is Emily. I found you on the street and brought you to the hospital so the doctors could help you." Michael turned his head toward his father, who had approached the head of the bed. There was something in the exchange of glances between father and son that broke Emily's heart. The boy seemed to be silently apologizing, while Julian fought against an emotion he clearly didn't know how to express. "Dad, I didn't mean to," Michael began, his voice choked. "Shh," Julian interrupted, reaching out to touch his son's hair but hesitating at the last moment, as if he didn't know if he had the right to offer comfort. "You're okay now. That's what matters." Emily watched the scene with a broken heart. There was so much unsaid love in that room that she could almost feel its weight in the air. A father who loved deeply but didn't know how to show it. A son who desperately needed affection but had learned not to ask for it. "Michael," she said softly, "were you scared of something when you left the house?" The boy looked at his father, then back at her, as if weighing whether he could trust this stranger who spoke to him as if she genuinely cared. "I dreamed about Mommy again," he admitted in a low voice. "She was calling me, but when I tried to go to her, she disappeared. And then I woke up and the house was so quiet and I thought Dad had left too." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily saw Julian briefly close his eyes, the raw pain cutting through his controlled mask. It was easy to imagine what happened in that mansion every night. A man traumatized by his own losses, trying to raise a son who mirrored his own wounds, both stumbling in emotional darkness without knowing how to find the light. "Your dad isn't going anywhere," Emily said with absolute conviction, looking directly at Julian. "He loves you more than anything in the world. Sometimes adults get scared too, and they don't know the right words to say what they feel." Michael absorbed this in silence, then extended his small hand toward Emily. "Can you stay here? Just until I fall asleep again?" Emily felt Julian's intense gaze on her, but she couldn't deny that request. She pulled a chair close to the bed and took Michael's hand in hers. "Of course, sweetie. I'll stay right here." Julian retreated to the corner of the room, but he didn't leave. He stood there, watching in silence as Emily talked quietly to Michael about simple things: the birds singing outside the window, the colors of the flowers on the windowsill, the stars hidden by the clouds. Gradually, the boy's breathing became deeper and more regular. When Michael finally fell asleep, Emily stood up carefully so as not to wake him. Julian was still there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. But there was something different in his posture, as if something inside him had shifted as he watched the scene. "Thank you," he said simply. Emily shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. It's what anyone would have done." "No." Julian straightened up, walking toward the window. "It's not. Most people would have left him there and moved on, or they would have called the police and gotten rid of the problem." He paused, looking out at the waking city below. "Why didn't you?" Emily considered the question seriously. "Because when I looked at him, I saw a scared little boy who needed help, not a problem to be solved. And me? What do you see when you look at me?" The question came with an intensity that made Emily hesitate. There was something dangerous in the way Julian stared at her, as if the answer could change something fundamental between them. "I see a father who is suffering just as much as his son." The raw honesty of the answer seemed to hit Julian like a punch. He turned completely to face her, his dark eyes searching her face as if looking for signs of falsehood or manipulation. "You don't know anything about me. I know you love him enough to be here at 4 in the morning. I know you're just as scared as he is. You just can't show it." Emily took a step toward him, her natural courage overcoming the obvious intimidation. "And I know that Michael needs to feel he can count on his father, not just be afraid of disappointing him. It's dangerous to talk to me like that." It wasn't a threat, but a warning. Emily could feel the tension radiating from him, the internal struggle between the vulnerability she had touched and the self-preservation instincts that had probably kept him alive for years. Everyone deserves to hear the truth sometimes. Julian moved closer, closing the distance between them until Emily could feel the heat emanating from his body. The expensive cologne mixed with something more primal and masculine that made her pulse race. "What if I told you I want you to work for me?" Emily blinked, surprised by the sudden change in the conversation's direction. "What do you mean?" "Michael needs a private nurse, someone who understands his needs, who knows how to handle his episodes." Julian's eyes never left hers. "Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong." "I couldn't afford your services," she blurted out, then realized he was offering her a job, not seeking one. Julian took a card from his inner suit pocket and extended it to her. "This isn't about what you can afford. It's about what I can offer." Emily took the card with trembling hands. The paper was thick, expensive, with only a name and a phone number engraved in gold letters. No company, no title, just Julian Thorne. "Think about what this would mean for your life, for your mother's life." His voice had dropped to a whisper that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "Think about what you could do for Michael." "And what would you get out of it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts. Julian smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes but carried dangerous promises. "The certainty that my son is in the hands of someone who truly cares about him." Emily looked at the card in her hands, then at Michael sleeping peacefully in the bed, then back at the man who clearly had the power to change her life forever. She knew that accepting would mean entering a world completely different from her own, a world where the rules were written by men like Julian. But she also knew that refusing would mean abandoning a child who had touched her heart, and a man who had awakened something in her she couldn't name. "I need to think." "Of course," Julian stepped back, reverting to the controlled man she had first met. "But don't take too long. Michael will be discharged tomorrow, and I'd prefer him to leave here knowing you'll be around." Emily nodded, putting the card in her bag. "Can I visit him before I give you my answer?" "I was hoping you would." As she headed for the door, his voice stopped her one last time. "Emily?" She turned, meeting those dark eyes that seemed capable of seeing through her soul. "Don't be afraid of me. Be afraid of what you'll feel if you decide to stay." The decision came on a rainy morning, 3 days after the hospital encounter. Emily was sitting in the tiny kitchen of her apartment, watching her mother drink the black coffee that was all they could afford at the end of the month. Sarah coughed again, the harsh sound echoing off the thin walls, and Emily felt the familiar weight of helplessness tighten her chest. Julian's card was on the table, between the past due bills and the supermarket discount flyers. 3 days of touching that piece of expensive paper, feeling the different texture between her fingers, imagining what it would be like to work for a man who clearly inhabited a universe completely different from hers. "Honey, you have to take it," Sarah said without looking up from her cup, as if she could read her daughter's thoughts. "An opportunity like this won't come twice. Mom, you don't understand. This man—" Emily paused, trying to find words to explain the unsettling feeling Julian had stirred in her. "He's dangerous. Every man with power is dangerous, dear. The question is whether he uses that power for good or for evil." Sarah finally looked up, and Emily saw in her eyes the wisdom of a lifetime spent fighting adversity. "And from what you've told me, he loves his son. That says a lot about a man." Emily picked up the card one more time, feeling the weight of the decision that would change everything. She thought of Michael, of his pale face and eyes full of sadness. She thought of her own mother, who deserved better medical treatment than they could afford. She thought of the medical degree that seemed like an impossible dream on her current salary. And she thought of Julian, of the way he had looked at her in the hospital, as if he could see parts of her that she didn't even know herself. 2 hours later, she was standing in front of an imposing building in the Gold Coast, looking up until her neck ached. The doorman, dressed in a uniform that cost more than her monthly salary, looked her up and down before making the call that would authorize her to go up. The private elevator ascended in absolute silence to the top floor. When the doors opened, Emily found herself facing a double door of dark wood that radiated solidity and wealth. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing a middle-aged man with perfectly coiffed grey hair and a suit that screamed professionalism. "Miss Hayes, I am Theodore, the Thorne family's butler. The master is expecting you." Emily followed Theodore through an entryway that was larger than her entire apartment. The Italian marble floor reflected the light pouring in from huge windows, creating golden patterns on the walls, decorated with paintings she was sure she had seen in art books. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the sound of Theodore's heels on the marble. Julian was waiting for her in what he probably called a study, but which looked more like a movie set. Mahogany shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound books. A huge desk dominated the center of the room, its polished surface reflecting the soft light coming through the silk curtains. He was standing by the windows, looking out at the city stretching below. He wore a white dress shirt open at the first button, the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. When he turned to face her, Emily again felt that turmoil in her stomach, as if her body recognized something dangerous before her mind could even process it. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said simply. "I thought so too." Julian gestured to a leather armchair that probably cost more than a used car. "Sit, let's discuss the terms." Emily settled into the armchair, trying not to show how out of place she felt in that environment. "First, I need to understand exactly what you expect of me." "Straight to the point. I like that." Julian moved closer, perching on the edge of the desk so he was slightly above her. It was a power position, and he knew it. Michael needs specialized medical care, but he also needs emotional stability, someone who is present not just during crises, but in his daily life. "Does that mean living here?" "Yes. There's a room prepared for you on the second floor, near Michael's room. You would have your own suite, with a private bathroom and a small living area." Emily tried to process the information. Leaving the apartment meant leaving her mother alone, something she had never done in her entire life. "And my mother?" Julian studied her face for a moment, as if evaluating something. "There's a vacant condo in the building next door. 3 bedrooms, a view of the park, all expenses covered. Your mother would have access to the best health insurance plan in the country and a monthly stipend that would ensure her comfort for the rest of her life." Emily blinked, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. It was a lot, an incredible amount just to take care of a child. "Why?" "Because I need you to be fully dedicated to Michael. And I know you can't do that if you're worried about your mother." It made sense, but there was something more. Emily could feel it between the lines, in the way he watched her, as if every word were carefully chosen to achieve a larger goal she couldn't yet see. "And what would my salary be?" Julian slid a piece of paper across the desk. When Emily saw the number, she had to blink several times to make sure she had read it correctly. It was 10 times more than she earned from both her jobs combined. "Is this per month?" "Per week." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of distant traffic from the avenue. Emily felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "In exchange for what? Because this isn't just about taking care of Michael, is it?" Julian stood up, walking back to the windows. When he spoke, there was a tension in his voice that hadn't been there before. "In exchange for your total discretion about everything you see or hear in this house. In exchange for your absolute loyalty to the family. And in exchange for you never, ever using Michael or the information you gain access to here against me." Emily realized she had just entered a much more complex territory than she had imagined. This wasn't just a rich family hiring care for their son. There were layers of power, influence, and danger that she was only beginning to glimpse. "If I accept, I can't just leave whenever I want, can I?" "You can." Julian turned to face her again, but his eyes carried an intensity that contradicted his words. "But I hope you won't want to." Before she could answer, the study door flew open and Michael ran in. The boy stopped abruptly when he saw Emily, a smile lighting up his pale face. "Emily, you came!" She stood up, opening her arms as Michael ran toward her. The tight hug he gave her melted away any resistance she might have had left. "Hi, sweetie. How are you?" "Better now that you're here. Dad said you might stay and take care of me. Is it true?" Emily looked over Michael's head at Julian, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. There was something in the way he looked at them, a silent hunger that made her shiver. "Is that what you would like?" she asked the boy. "More than anything in the world?" The simplicity and honesty of the answer hit her like a punch to the gut. Emily found herself thinking of all the children who had passed through her life in hospitals, but none had touched her the way Michael had in such a short time. "Then I guess that's what we'll do." The smile that lit up Michael's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He hugged her tighter, whispering a thank you that reached the bottom of her soul. When she looked up again, Emily found Julian watching her with an intensity that made her pulse race. There was triumph in his eyes, but also something darker, more possessive. "Theodore will show you to your quarters," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Your things can be picked up today." "I need to talk to my mother first." "Of course. Michael, how about you show Emily her room?" The boy took her hand, pulling her toward the door with the energy of a child who was genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. But as she followed Michael through the luxurious corridors of the mansion, Emily felt Julian's gaze burning on her back, loaded with promises she wasn't sure she wanted him to keep. The room they showed her was larger than her entire apartment. The king-size bed was covered with sheets that felt like clouds, and the huge windows overlooked an inner garden that looked more like a private park. There was a study desk, a reading chair, a spacious walk-in closet, and a bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people. "Do you like it?" Michael asked eagerly. "It's beautiful, sweetie, and it's right next to my room. Look!" Michael took her to his room, which was a universe of books, games, and toys any child would dream of. But Emily immediately noticed that despite all the expensive objects, the room had the same feeling of emotional emptiness that permeated the entire house. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and comfortable, but still a prison. And she had just agreed to become a prisoner too. 3 months had passed since Emily moved into the Thorne mansion, and the routine she had developed with Michael had completely transformed the dynamics of the house. The boy she had found pale and haunted on that March dawn now ran through the gardens with rosy cheeks, laughed during meals, and slept peacefully every night. The nightmares still appeared occasionally, but Emily had learned to recognize the signs and was always there to calm him. The change in Michael was obvious to everyone, but the more subtle transformation was happening in Julian. The man who initially only came home for silent dinners now lingered, asking about his son's day, listening with genuine attention to the stories the boy told about his lessons with Emily. She had convinced Julian to hire private tutors to come to the house, creating a more welcoming learning environment than the traditional schools Michael had been through. But it was during the evenings that the real magic happened. After Michael fell asleep, Emily and Julian would meet in the library, she correcting the medical exercises she had started studying again, he reviewing business papers. The silence between them had evolved from uncomfortable to intimate, charged with a tension that grew with every exchanged glance. Every time their hands accidentally touched while passing the salt at dinner. It was on one of those nights that everything changed. Emily was bent over an anatomy book when she felt Julian approach from behind her armchair. His masculine scent, mixed with the aroma of the whiskey he was sipping, made her close her eyes involuntarily. Studying the human heart, his deep voice murmured close to her ear, sending shivers down her spine. Trying to understand how something so small can control an entire life, she replied without turning, aware of the heat emanating from his body so close. "Found any answers?" Emily finally turned in the armchair, finding herself face to face with Julian. He had leaned over the backrest, his hands resting on the sides, creating a kind of intimate prison around her. His dark eyes shone with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I'm still researching," she whispered. Julian's hand moved slowly, his fingers lightly touching her face, tracing her jawline with a delicacy that contrasted with all the hardness she knew he carried. Emily. The name came out like a prayer, loaded with months of repressed desire. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't resist. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he feared she would disappear. But when Emily responded, twining her fingers in his dark hair, Julian lost all control. What followed was an explosion of passion that had been contained for too long. He lifted her from the armchair, pressing her against the bookshelves, his hands exploring the curves that had tormented his dreams for months. Emily lost herself in the sensation of his lips on her neck, in the way his large, calloused hands trembled as they touched her, as if she was something too precious to be real. "I shouldn't," he murmured against her skin, but his actions contradicted his words. "Why?" she asked, pulling his face toward hers so she could look into his eyes. "Because you deserve better than a man like me." The raw vulnerability in his voice broke Emily's heart. She held Julian's face between her hands, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "You don't decide what I deserve. And I choose you, Julian. I choose you and Michael and this crazy life we've built together." The kiss that followed was different, deeper, filled with promises and mutual surrender. When they parted, they were both breathing heavily, and there was something in Julian's eyes she had never seen before: hope. The happiness lasted exactly 2 weeks. Emily was in the garden with Michael when Theodore appeared with a grave face, whispering something in the boy's ear that made his eyes widen in fear. Julian had left early for a meeting she knew was more dangerous than usual, but he had promised to be back for lunch. "What happened?" she asked, but Theodore just shook his head. "Ma'am, I need you to take Michael inside. Now." The urgency in his voice made Emily's blood run cold. She took Michael's hand and ran into the house, which suddenly felt different, as if shadows had materialized in the corners. It was when she saw the armed men in the living room that she understood the gravity of the situation. "Ah, the famous nurse," a man in a dark suit said, smiling in a way that made her stomach churn. "Lorenzo Mendoza, a pleasure to finally meet you." Emily instinctively pulled Michael behind her, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "What do you want?" "A conversation with your boss, but since he's not available at the moment, you'll be our guarantee that he shows up." "Leave the child out of this." Lorenzo laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the room. "The child is exactly the point, my dear. Julian needs to learn that his actions have consequences, and nothing teaches a better lesson than threatening what he loves most." Emily's phone rang. Lorenzo gestured for her to answer, but kept a gun pointed in Michael's direction. "Emily?" Julian's voice was filled with a tension she had never heard. "Are you okay? Is Michael okay?" "We're fine," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "For now, put Lorenzo on the phone." Emily handed the device to the man, who took it with a satisfied smile. "Julian, my old friend, so good to hear your voice." Emily couldn't hear what Julian was saying on the other end, but she saw Lorenzo's smile widen with every second. "Oh, don't worry. They're safe. For now. But you have a choice to make. Your territories on the south side, or the life of your new family." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily held Michael against her, whispering words of comfort as the boy trembled with fear. "You have 1 hour to decide," Lorenzo continued. "And Julian, if you try anything clever, it'll be the last thing you do." The call ended, and Lorenzo settled into an armchair, as if he were in his own home. Now, we wait. The 57 minutes that followed were the longest of Emily's life. Michael cried silently against her chest, and she sang softly the songs her mother used to sing to her as a child, trying to keep them both calm while her mind worked frantically for an escape. It was when she heard the sound of helicopters that she knew Julian had arrived. What happened next was too chaotic and violent for her to fully process. Julian's men stormed the house from all directions simultaneously. The shootout lasted less than 5 minutes, and when the silence returned, Lorenzo was dead on the living room floor, and Emily was in Julian's arms, trembling uncontrollably. "It's over," he whispered against her hair, his hands running over her body, searching for injuries. "It's over, my love. You're safe." Michael threw himself into his father's arms, crying with relief, and for the first time since she had met him, Emily saw tears in Julian's eyes. "I almost lost you," he said in a broken voice. "I almost—" "But you didn't," Emily interrupted, holding his face in her hands. "We're here. We're alive. We're together." That night, after Michael finally fell asleep, exhausted from the day's trauma, Emily found Julian on the balcony of his study, looking out at the silent city below. "I need to get out of this world," he said without turning. "I can't put you in danger anymore." "And can you? Just get out? It won't be easy." "It won't be quick, but yes, I can." He turned to face her, his eyes full of determination. "For you two, I can do anything." "For us?" Julian approached, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Emily." It wasn't quite a request, but it wasn't an order either. It was a plea from the bottom of a man's soul who had discovered that love was more powerful than any empire he could build. "Julian, I know it's not fair to ask this after what happened today. I know my world is dangerous, that you might never be completely safe by my side, but I swear on everything holy that I will spend the rest of my life protecting you, protecting Michael, building something clean and good for our family." Emily felt tears run down her face. She could see the future he offered, could feel the genuine love radiating from him, the sincere promise of change. "And if you can't get out completely, then we'll face whatever comes, together." Her answer came in the form of a kiss, deep and full of promise. When they separated, they both knew they had sealed something much more than an agreement. They had chosen to build a life based on the love that consumed them. 2 years later, Emily woke up on the estate Julian had bought in the countryside, listening to the sound of Michael playing in the garden with the staff's children. Her medical degree was framed on the wall, and the clinic she ran in the nearby town was already serving hundreds of children for free. Julian entered the room carrying a breakfast tray, smiling in the way she had learned to love more than anything in the world. The dangerous man from their first encounters had transformed into the dedicated husband and present father he had chosen to be. "Good morning, Dr. Thorne," he said, kissing her softly. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she replied, pulling him into bed. Outside, Michael shouted with joy, chasing butterflies in the garden. And for the first time in their lives, all three of them knew the true meaning of the word home. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.